Hey there, Nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Chiefskate, and welcome to another episode of Way of the Underhive. This series is dedicated to helping brand new players to Necromunda build their starting rosters and learn more about the game mechanics of their favorite gangs. And on today's episode, we will discuss playing a Rogue Factoria Outcast Gang. We will discuss their strengths, weaknesses, fighters, as well as their playstyle, and provide critical information that you can use in your campaign. Now, since the Necromunda Ashways setting has now opened up for campaigns, playing a Rogue Factoria Outcast Gang is actually quite a viable option to do out in the Ashways. And the reason why is because of all the delegation gangs are available for the criminal syndicates. The Rogue Factoria is one of the cheapest, and they actually have one of the most plentiful fighters as well. And even though they may be considered the very bottom tier of the criminals, I'm going to show you exactly how you could turn your Rogue Factoria Outcast Gang into one of the most dominant gangs to ever hit the ash wastes and the highways of Necromunda. So that being said, let's get this video on a roll. Alright, so let's talk about the strengths of playing a Delegation Outcast Gang. So potentially it's one of the most powerful starting gangs that you can actually have in a campaign, and the reason why is because of the fighters that make up your delegations. Regardless if you're playing criminal, merchant, or noble house delegations, they usually all start off with excellent equipment and skills right from the start. In some cases they have some really good stats, and they have some very powerful special rules that can make them really advantageous and very competitive in an Ashways campaign. At the same time, you can also take advantage of Wyrd disciplines now because the Book of the Outcast released those Wyrd disciplines. You can even customize your fighters even further. And in addition to adding vehicles with heavier weapon options and different boons and weapon gears from those vehicles, could also give your delegation gang a huge advantage out in the Ashways of Necromunda. And these are some of the advantages and strengths of actually playing a delegation outcast gang. Alright, so perhaps the biggest weakness of actually playing a delegation gang that's an outcast gang is that you cannot take any alliances whatsoever. If you decide to use the delegation as the core of your gang, no alliances are available to you. So for example, if you're a merchant guild delegation gang, you can't take criminal alliances or noble house alliances, and vice versa for all the other ones as well. So that's one of the biggest weaknesses of playing a delegation gang. If you really like using alliances to help your gang out, this might not be the one for you. However though, like I said before in the strengths, it does give you a leg up in the actual beginning of a campaign because you have better fighters, better equipment, and better skills. Now, one of the weaknesses of this game, of course, is that if you decide to play WYSIWYG, which is an acronym for what you see is what you get type of gangs, this can be quite pricey in my opinion. And the reason why is because, for example, if you were to play a Nauticin siphoning delegation, for example, as the core of your gang, and you want to buy the Forge World miniatures in order to fill that gang, those Forge World miniatures can be quite expensive. So because of that, I would suggest looking for cheaper alternatives or convert your own in most cases. A lot of these delegations have not been manufactured yet, so you could possibly do that, but that's just something you might want to take into account. Me, of course, I would never actually do that. I would just convert my own or find alternate ways to get cheaper miniatures, and that's the thing I would keep in mind when I would be playing a delegation gang. At the same time, these gangs are also very expensive to field in terms of credits. These delegations, like I said, have a lot of skills, a lot of weapons, better stats, and you're going to pay for those. For example, I think the cheapest of the delegations starts off at like 540 credits, I believe. So because of that, it's going to be very, very expensive for you to fill these fighters, but that's the way it goes. And lastly, probably the biggest weakness of actually playing an outcast delegation gang is that you do have to beware of the balanced bandwagon. A lot of balanced bandwagon types will scream overpowered or game breaking or unfair and so on and so forth. But of course, once again, just ignore those immaturity of those players, drink the salt of their tears, and just use that to power yourself in destroying your enemies. So these are some of the strengths and weaknesses involved with playing a delegation gang. Alright, so when it comes to delegation gangs, once again, you get to pick from merchant guilds, criminal syndicates, or noble houses, and use those delegations you get from those alliances to form the core of your gang. Leaders also get archetypes and affiliations depending on what delegation you choose. Also, champions also get archetypes as well, so that allows for a lot of customization for your different members of your delegations depending on the affiliations and the archetypes that you choose. Now, once again, remember, archetypes depend on what kind of primary and secondary skills your champions and your leaders receive, while affiliations usually determine what kind of weapons and equipment you can get from the starting list, if not from the trading post as well. At the same time, the nice thing about these delegations is that the members of those delegations gain experience and they can purchase weapons and equipment over time, just like any other gang. So that part is really, really cool. And once again, I have to make sure I stress this a lot. If you decide to take a delegation outcast gang, you cannot make any alliances whatsoever in the future. So just be aware when that actually happens and keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to your actual criminal delegations that you can actually play in your Outcast gang, there's pretty much 5 that you can choose from, all right? Now, granted, there are 6 criminal syndicate factions within the Book of Judgment. However, the Narcolords are not present in this delegation, and the reason why is because their delegation just consists of D3 plus 2 hive scum that you could just hire, so that's the reason why they don't have that faction available to you. However, for your delegations, though, you can play a Smuggler Shore Party from the Cold Traders, a Factoria Work Gang from the Rogue Factoria faction. You can play a Master Charlatan from the Imperial Imposters faction. You can play a Rebel Lord from the Fallen Houses faction, or a Mind-Locked Wyrd from the Psi Syndicate faction as well. So these are the 5 delegations that you could actually choose from in order to build your gangs. Now, once again, I must remind you, of course, if you decide to do a delegation gang from one of the criminal syndicates, you will not be able to allow to take allies in your list, so keep that in mind. However, there are some advantages. Any weapons, equipment that these gangs actually start off with, their delegations, you can purchase those for all of your Outcast champions and Outcast hive scum as well. So that's where the kind of the trade-off comes in. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about how you can use your criminal delegation specifically in the next slide. Alright, so first of all, let's go ahead and talk about the Rogue Factoria. Now, originally when you look at it as a former delegation of your gang, even though it costs 315 credits, the number one thing that most people might think about is why bother making a Rogue Factoria work gang? Well, there's actually a couple things going for them. Now, originally the Rogue Factoria was actually quite useful as an alliance that you made with the crime syndicates for your Malah, Misrule, Dominion campaigns, etc. And the reason why is because the Rogue Factoria, while their fighters are not that great, they're a perfect spammable, expendable body shields protect your valuable fighters, and you can of course use counterfeit weaponry in order to enhance your gang over the course of the campaign. Now, in a Outcast gang, though, they actually form the core of your gang by actually using your leaders, champions, and actually some of your fighters. And the reason why this is actually kind of good is because not necessarily the fighters are all that great, but the equipment they actually come with is exceptionally good. So let's go and talk about those real quick. So first of all, you have access to auto plasma Combi-Pistols right off the bat. And the reason why is because it's included in your delegation's equipment starting list, and you can actually purchase that for your gang yourself. So those are a very powerful combination. If you throw man-stopper rounds on an Autopistol, it gives you strength 4. Plasma pistols are always good, and you can also fire both weapons as well, which is really nice. At the same time, you do have access to shock batons, which is also kind of nice, giving you additional melee attack with parry, and at the same time has a shock trait. But perhaps the best thing that comes with this are shock whips. Shock whips are usually associated with House Escher gangs, and they only cost 25 credits to have it. These 25 credits weapons give you +1 strength, a 3-inch versatile trait as well with shock trait attached to it. That makes it super impressive. At the same time, you also get 3 relatively expendable fighter choices costing only 25 credits each, and they're easily replaceable because they only cost 25 credits. Think of them as juvie level fighters for your gang, and they also automatically come with either a reclaimed autogun or a reclaimed Autopistol with a knife. So they already come with equipment already, which is absolutely great. At the same time, a Rogue Factoria work gang also very much exemplifies the principle of mass army, which basically you have more bodies. More bodies mean you have more attacks means you can cause more damage potentially. At the same time, because of your work party boss, you do have Iron Will available in this gang, which means you have -1 to bottle test, which is always nice to have as well. So even though Rogue Factoria may seem like a very poor choice to build a gang off of, depending on how you kit your gang out, it can actually be very dominant if you do it right. Alright, so first of all, let's talk about your Factoria Overseer. This is going to be the leader of your gang. This fighter would cost you 160 credits. So let's go ahead and talk about their stats real quick. So the Overseer has a movement value of 4 inches with a 4+ weapon skill, 3+ ballistic skill. They have 3 strength, 3 toughness, as well as 2 wounds. They have 4+ initiative, 2 attacks. They have 8 leadership, 7 cool, 6 willpower, as well as 6 intelligence. And this is going to be the leader for your gang. Now, oddly enough, this is actually a pretty good stat line for a leader of a gang. Before, it wouldn't really matter what the stats were for the Factoria Overseer because they weren't the main fighters in your gang. You just use them as a little additional fire team to add to your alliance, which would be really nice. But now that the Factoria Overseer can be the leader of a gang, their intelligence stats, their psychological stats are actually quite good for what they can do, and they actually have some pretty decent stats for combat as well. Now, when it comes to your Factoria Overseer, my opinion is when you choose your archetype for this character, I suggest either go with a Gunslinger archetype, so that way you can get spammable shooting attacks, or go with the Brawler archetype, so that way you can also get access to combat and ferocity as well. And the reason why that is the case is because of the equipment they come with. Now, your Factoria Overseer comes with mesh armor, giving them a 5+ armor save. They come with a Combi-Pistol, which is a combination of Autopistol and Plasma Pistol, which is always good, and they also have Shock Baton as well. Like I mentioned, the Autopistol, when you upgrade that with Man Stopper rounds, gives you full rapid fire, strength 4 attacks, which is always awesome. Plasma pistols are always fun to have, especially in a gang. So even though they're not, you know, their stats may be kind of mediocre, they're actually pretty kitted out pretty good for short range to shooting or close combat, so they're actually quite good. That shock baton, for example, gives you bonuses for parry, and as well as give you the shock trait for your attacks, and that's always a good thing to have in close combat. So even though on the surface you might think they're not that good, they actually have a lot going on for this fighter, all things considered. So continuing on with the Overseer, depending on what skills you give them will depend on the archetype that you give them. Now your Overseer automatically comes with Commanding Presence and Overseer, which is actually great. Your Commanding Presence is excellent for larger group activations as well, which is always a good thing. However, to be honest, probably the most useful skill for them is going to be their Overseer ability. Overseer skill allows them to do double sets of activations on a chosen fire within 12 inches. They can actually do 2 sets of activations, which is always powerful. If you pair this guy with a champion with a really good special weapon, they can use that special weapon twice because they get to activate with it as well. Or if you have a vehicle with a heavy weapon on it, or the case may be, it's always a good idea to have that. Now, with that being said, of course, having your Factoria Overseer would be kind of good. You could use Fast Shot. Fast Shot's always good to have with your gunfight ability because then you can shoot your weapon twice. At the same time, you could also take, as I said before, the Brawler archetype to give them Bull Charge, which means now that their Shock Baton gives them +1 to strength, and they also have the knockback ability, which is also really nice to have since you can knock off your opponents off of vehicles. So it just kind of depends on what kind of focus you want to take for your leader, and then of course choose your archetype and skills accordingly. Alright, so next up, let's talk about your Work Party boss. This is actually going to be one of your champions, and this fighter costs you 80 credits. Now, when it comes to their stats, they have 4-inch movement allowance, they have a 5+ weapon skill, 4+ ballista skill, they have 2 strength, 3 toughness, 1 wound, they have 4+ initiative, they have 1 attack, 7 leadership, 6 cool, 6 willpower, as well as 6 intelligence. Now, the Work Party boss. The Work Party boss is usually like the joke of the criminal alliances just because of how horrible their stats were, as well as the equipment they were actually giving with. But oddly enough, this is not a problem in a outcast gang, and the reason why is because you have a 6 of willpower. So as strange as it may sound, giving this guy the Wyrd archetype, which allows him to take weird powers and weird disciplines, is actually pretty good. And the reason why is because with that 6 of willpower, they have a 72% chance of success in getting their actual psychic abilities off. And the odds of that actually increase over time exponentially, especially if you upgrade them with willpower stats, which is very easy to do because this person could actually choose their own upgrades and their own and spend their experience points accordingly. So because of that, I would highly suggest actually putting a Wyrd archetype on this character, so that way you can get some bonuses to that. And we'll talk about exactly what psychic power would actually help them out the most. Now, when it comes to their equipment, and this is where the Work Party boss is kind of strange. So they do have Mesh Armor, which gives a 5 up armor save. They also have a Laspistol, which is okay. You know, that 4+ ballista skill. But they come with Shock Whips, which is actually kind of weird because they only have a 5 up weapon skill, right, and a 2 strength. So giving a Shock Whip seems kind of weird because I'm not really going to be able to use it to the maximum of their ability. I mean, granted, they give a 3-inch versatile trait, which is nice, and they also give +1 to their strength, I suppose. It gives them strength 3, which is kind of nice, and shock, but it's not as devastating of a weapon as it would be in the hands of other members of this delegation, or with your outcast champions or your outcast scum. And that's where the Work Party boss kind of like falls out of place, because that horrible weapon skill and strength characteristic isn't really going to maximize the potential of that shock whip. But we'll talk about some ways of how you can kind of mitigate that and actually improve it with your Work Party boss. Now, even though they have excellent gear for close combat, those horrible stats are not going to do them any good, right? And at the same time, they do come with Iron Will, which is kind of nice because it gives you -1 to your battle test, but still not impressive skills. But here's where this is where the things get a little bit different. Because you're going to make this guy into a Wyrd archetype, I suggest you take the Biomancy discipline for this character. And the reason why is because there's a very specific power that you can use in the Biomancy discipline tree called the Quickening. It is a basic action to get this this ability off, and when you get the Quickening off, what it does is adds 3 to your movement characteristic, which is nothing to write home about. Having this guy movement 7 is not all that great. However, though, you did get +1 weapon skill, and you do get +1 ballistic skill, and that will definitely help out your Work Party boss, okay? The way you actually do this is that you don't ever actually charge your Work Party boss into close combat. They never charge forward, okay? What they'll do is they'll take their first basic action to get the Quickening off, And then their second basic action will then to be used the Shock Whip's versatile trait to do a fight action at distance. They'll be able to hit their opponents from 3 inches away with that, plus they got that 3-inch extra movement as well, so that way they can jump out of combat if they need to. Their weapon skill now gets elevated to weapon skill 4, and of course their strength still stays at 3 because of that +1 for the Shock Whip. Now, it may not be all that great, but you do have that shock trait, which could cause some damage later on, which is kind of helpful. And this is how you kind of mitigate what the work party boss can basically do, is by using that Biomancy discipline and using that Quickening ability in order to make that happen. Now, the last fighter we're going to talk about real quick is your Factoria, your Factoria workers. Okay, so let's talk about the Factoria workers and how they basically help you out. So you get 3 of these guys, and 3 of these guys will represent gangers in your gang, and they do cost 25 credits apiece. So that's their overall cost for these guys, and let's talk about their stats real quick. So these guys have horrible stats. They have a 4-inch movement characteristic, they have 5+ weapon skill, 5+ ballistic skill, they have 3 strength, 3 toughness, they have 1 wound, 4+ initiative, 1 attack, and they have 8 leadership, 8 cool, 8 willpower, and 8 intelligence. Now, when it comes to these fighters, you can either equip them with a reclaimed autogun or a reclaimed autopistol and fighting knife. So yeah, the Factoria workers are not that great. They have horrible stats, they have horrible weapons, but oddly enough, this is actually a good thing. And the reason why is because of their cost. They only cost 25 credits apiece. So if one of these Factoria workers die, no harm, no foul, you just hire another one for 25 credits to take their place, okay? Think of them as juvie level spammable body shields and cannon fodder, and that's basically what your Factoria worker will serve you as in your gang. So I would never go more than default when it comes to their equipment, just because they're not going to last very long. You're going to put them in horrible suicidal situations where they're going to either have to either succeed or they will die horrible deaths because you're trying to protect your better fighters on that one. Use these guys to protect your more valuable fighters. It's just that simple, that plain. If you need to abort an enemy vehicle, these are the guys that go in first, because if they die, oh well, you can just hire new ones. All right, it's not that big of a deal. And that's the reason why Factoria workers, that's where they kind of fit, and that's their niche within this gang as well. You always put them as point men. You always put them in situations where if someone might die, these are the guys that go in, because if they die, you could easily replace them. It's not that big a deal. Keep your outcast scum and your outcast champions safe. Keep your work party boss safe. Keep your Factoria overseers safe, but send your Factoria workers to die, because they're kind of useless, and that's actually kind of a benefit for this gang as well. So now that we're done talking about the members of the delegation, let's go ahead and talk about outcast champions as well as outcast scum. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the Underhive Outcast Champion real quick. For these gangs, these guys cost 60 credits apiece, and for their stats, they have 5-inch movement, 3+ weapon skill, 4+ ballistic skill, they have 3 strength, 3 toughness, they also have 2 wounds, they have 4 initiative, 1 attack, they have 6 leadership, 7 cool, 8 willpower, as well as 8 intelligence. So let's go on and talk about these guys real quick. So when it comes to the Underhive Outcast Champions, they're very versatile, and the reason why is because their stats are pretty much mediocre. Now that's both a good and a bad thing. While it might be bad because they can't excel at any one given thing, whether it's shooting or close combat, it does allow them to be able to equip a large variety of weapons and fulfill any role that you need them to fulfill within your gang as well. Now, when it also comes to your guys' Underhive Outcast Champions, archetypes, of course, are very, very important. But the problem with these guys, though, is that their archetypes are very limited for their skills, in my opinion. For example, they have 5 different archetypes they can choose from, but they only have 1 primary skill, and each of those archetypes followed by 2 secondaries. So, for example, if you were to take the Brawler archetype, Brawn would be your primary with Ferocity and Leadership as your secondaries. If you were a Gunslinger archetype, Shooting would be your primary with Agility as well as Leadership as your secondaries. For a Survivor archetype, Ferocity would be your primary, followed by Combat and Leadership for your secondaries. For Mastermind, Cunning would be your primary, with Leadership and Savant as your secondaries. And of course, for Wyrd archetypes, your Psychic Disciplines would be your primary, followed by Cunning and Leadership as your secondaries. Unfortunately for the champion, there are no archetypes where combat is a primary, so that is kind of limiting on what you can do. So you won't be getting any skills really to increase your combat abilities, but better weapons and equipment choices could probably help out with that as well. Now, when it comes to their equipment and weapons, they can purchase pretty much anything they want to off the trading post, so long as it's within the rarity value of 8 on the trading post. So they are kind of limited in some of their choices, but the reason why that is the case is because you can take 1 champion for every 3 hive scum in your gang. So for example, if you have 6 hive scum in your gang, you can take 2 champions. If you got 9 hive scum, you can get 3 champions, and etc. So that's basically where the trade-off kind of comes in. And then finally, of course, we have our Underhive Outcast Hive Scum, which is your typical Ganger and Juvie level fighter for your gang. These guys cost 30 credits apiece. For their stats, they have 5-inch movement, 4+ weapon skill and ballistic skill, 3 strength and toughness. They have 1 wound, 4+ for initiative, 1 attack. They have 8+ for leadership, cool, willpower, and intelligence. And for their skill access, when they become a specialist, their primary is cunning, with ferocity as their secondary. Now, Underhive Scum, Outcast Scum, they're very mediocre, okay? But because of that, they're also very cheap to field. And even though they have very mediocre stats, they count as both gangers and juvie level fighters for your gang. And because their stats are still so mediocre, they can fulfill many different roles in your gang. You can equip them as shooters, close combat, you can use them as support, you can use them as suicide bombers, especially now that you can also put them on waster dirt bikes. They make great pursuers on waster dirt bikes, for example. So there's a variety of things you can do with these guys to fulfill pretty much any role that you want to. And plus, if you decide to make it into a delegation gang, you can also take better weapons equipment from the delegation lists as well. So that's another cool thing about Outcast Hive Scum as well. Now, unfortunately, you cannot start your campaign with an Outcast specialist, so that part is kind of sad. Almost every single gang can have a specialist except for Outcast, so that part is kind of sad, but that's the kind of the trade-off. Yes, you can't get those specialists, but right at the start, but you have so many guys you can choose from, and plus your delegations can fulfill those roles anyways, so it's not that big of an issue. So that makes up your guys' Outcast Hive Scum. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about your army list on this one. This one I call the Rogue One Outcast Factoria Work Gang. It's going to cost you 1,400 credits. Now, why do I call it Rogue One? Because it's probably the only build you're probably going to ever use with these guys. So first of all, you have your Factoria Overseer. This fighter's going to cost you 160 credits. This fighter's got the Gunslinger Archetype, as well as mesh armor. They have a Combi-Pistol, which is a combination of Autopistol and Plasma Pistol. They have a shock Baton, as well as commanding presence, as well as Overseer, and you give them the fast shot ability, so that way they can fire twice with that Combi-Pistol. Then you give a work body boss. It's going to cost you 80 credits for that fighter. They got the Wyrd Archetype. They're also equipped with mesh armor, Laspistol, and shock whip. They have the Iron Will skill, as well as the Biomancy discipline, the Quickening, to give them the buffs to their movement, as well as their weapon skill and ballistic skill. After that, you got 2 Outcast champions. Champion number 1 is going to cost you 150 credits. This fighter's got the Gunslinger Archetype, as well as mesh armor. You're giving them a Combi-Pistol of Autopistol with a Plasma Pistol, just like your Overseer leader. You're giving them a chain sword for close combat and the fast shot ability, so that way they can shoot that pistol twice. And then you have Outcast champion number 2 is going to cost you 145 credits. This fighter's got the Mastermind Archetype, as well as mesh armor. They have a grenade launcher with frag and crack grenade, as well as a stub gun for backup, and they also have the Overwatch ability, so that way they can interrupt enemy activations. Now after that, you got 3 Factoria workers. The workers number 1, 2, and 3. All 3 will cost you 25 credits apiece. All 3 will have reclaimed auto pistols and fighting knives. Then you will have Hive Scum. Hive Scum number 3 and 4 cost you 60 credits apiece. Both will be armed with stub guns as well as shock whips. Then you have Outcast Scum number 5 and 6. Both of them will cost you 40 credits, and they're both armed with reclaimed auto guns. Now, you will also have 3 Scum Racers in this gang with 3 different vehicles. Scum Racer number 1 is going to cost you 255 credits. They're going to be driving a Ridge Runner with a mining laser, as well as Nitro Burner for +1 movement. Scum Racer number 2 is going to cost you 200 credits. This driver is going to be driving a Walker custom vehicle with a grenade launcher with frag and crack grenades, as well as Nitro Burners to move up +1 movement. They have transport beds. They can transport fighters, as well as a boarding ramp, so you can do boarding actions. And then you're going to purchase another Scum Racer for Scum Racer number 3. It's going to cost you 135 credits for this guy. They're driving a custom light vehicle with tire claws for +1 handling, a transport bed so that way they can transport fighter, smoke vents so that way your enemy suffers a -1 hit against in shooting, as well as a boarding ramp so your fighters can do boarding actions. Now granted, you are taking a considerable amount of credits out of your gang starting roster in order to get these vehicles, but trust me when I say this, you're going to want these 3 vehicles. Now, this is by far the largest of the criminal outcast gangs in terms of numbers of champions, fighters, as well as vehicles that you'll have in this gang. For example, you have 3 champions in this game, which is kind of nice. Now, individually, these fighters are not very impressive on their own. That goes without a doubt. But working in tandem with using teamwork, the gang synergizes well in order to dominate their enemies because they'll be attacking their enemies in a swarm. The overall tactic with this gang is to swarm your enemies with numbers and to destroying them. This is a highly mobile game, which is also perfect for seizing objectives quickly and having enough numbers to hold on to them and having the firepower to count in order to make that happen. Now, this gang consists of 3 fire teams. You have 2 assault fire teams and 1 support fire team. Assault fire team number 1 consists of your Factoria Overseer, your Outcast champion number 1, Outcast Scum number 3, and Outcast Scum number 4, and Scum Racer number 2. This fire team's role is to move forward towards the enemy as quickly as possible to either board enemy vehicles or engage enemy infantry. The custom walker will get you there faster with natural burners, giving you a 6-inch movement, and while this is occurring, the scum racer can open fire with their grenade launcher, launching frags or cracks depending on the situation. Now, the Factoria Overseer uses their Overseer skill or Commanding Presence skill depending upon the situation. You can use Overseer ability to allow Scum Racer number 2 to move twice or move and shoot twice, etc. When boarding enemy vehicles or assaulting enemy dismounted fighters, use the Commanding Presence ability to group activate Outcast Champion number 1 as well as Outcast Scum number 3 and 4. Fast shot on your champion will allow you to shoot up to 4 times for both your Factoria Overseer as well as your champion, letting them open up their auto pistols as well as their plasma pistols. Alright, so they get 2 from their auto pistol and 2 from their plasma pistol. And when you get a chance, purchase man stopper rounds as soon as possible for those pistols to give them strength 4 for their auto pistol attacks. Now, Outcast Champion number 1 serves as like the bodyguard for your Factoria Overseer. They have fast shot as well, which allows them to shoot up to 4 times, twice their auto pistol and twice with their plasma pistol. And they have a chain sword, will also assist in close combat as they assault the objective. And like I said before, purchase man stopper rounds for that fighter as soon as possible as well. Now, while that's occurring, Outcast Scum number 3 and 4 use their shock whips and ride-by attacks. So because they'll be attacking at distance or charging forward using that 3-inch versatile trait that gives them +1 strength as well as shock, and you'll be able to cause a lot more damage. I highly suggest purchasing dum-dum rounds and mesh armor for these guys as soon as possible, so that way they're a little bit more survivable as time goes on. Now, Assault Fire Team number 2 will consist of your work party boss, Factoria number worker number 1, 2, 3, as well as Scum Racer number 3. Now, this fire team is act as a suicide squad / kamikaze assault fire team. Scum Racer number 3's movement of 7 inches speed will get your fighters there delivered faster, and the vehicle's transport bed allows them to ride the vehicle, and the boarding ramp will assist with a +1 initiative to board. And the vehicle has no weapons, at least for now, and does have a single smoke fin on it to give you -1 hit against. Now, I suggest buying better weapons for this vehicle as soon as possible. This fire team's job is to move in to attack, keep the work party boss alive if possible, and if the workers die, no problems, they only get 25 credits apiece, so you can easily replace them. Now, as for the work party boss, due to their horrible stats, I do suggest the following when you finally enter close combat. 1. Never charge your work party boss into close combat. Instead, use your very first action to activate the Quickening psychic power. This will give your work party boss 3+ to their movement, as well as +1 weapon skill, ballistic skill. And then 2, use a fight basic action to attack with your shock whip using that 3-inch versatile trait. It's going to really help you out manage to do that, and also get off shock if you're lucky and take out opponents that way. Now, your support fire team will consist of Outcast Champion number 2, Outcast Scum number 5, Outcast Scum number 6, and Scum Racer number 1. Now, this fire team's role is to provide longer range suppressive fire for the gang. As the fleet moves forward, Scum Racer number 1 targets larger enemy vehicles with their mining laser, and as a bonus, you will have +1 movement due to the nitro burners, making your vehicle movement 8. You can also upgrade the Rich Runner as the campaign develops depending on your playstyle, while either making it faster, more durable, or adding more weapons to it. It's entirely up to you. Now, while this is occurring, Outcast Champion 2 uses their Overwatch skill to interrupt enemy activations, firing their grenade launchers to support Scum Racer number 1's efforts. Meanwhile, Outcast Scum number 3 and 6 use their auto guns to shoot at medium to close range. I highly suggest equipping them with telescopic sights to give them accuracy at longer ranges, or better yet, get them blasting charges as soon as possible. And this way, they can have more accurate fire at distance, or they can allow blasting charges on their enemy as they manage to pass enemy infantry. So like I said before, this is the largest of the criminal outcast gangs with 3 vehicles with 3 fire teams as well. And like I said earlier, while individually these fighters are horrible and will not do very much against your opponents as individuals, working as a team, swarming your opponents by attacking explosive flanks, having the number of fighters that you do to kind of surge forward and to surround your enemies in closer in combat, it's going to be absolutely devastating to your opponents. In fact, these guys actually have more guys on the ground than Aus Cowder gangs do, so that tells you exactly how powerful these guys are going to be in the Ash Wastes. So there you guys have it. This is what I like to call the Rogue One Outcast Factoria Work Gang at 1,400 credits. So in conclusion, playing a Merchant Guild Delegation Outcast Gang is some of the great ways to add a lot of variety and diversity within a Necromunda campaign. That was actually one of the cool things that came out with the Book of the Outlands, that you got to see so many new gangs to be able to field into campaigns and keep things fresh, keep things interesting, and show a lot of cool different options you can actually do to make the world of Necromunda really, really awesome. At the same time, by playing a Merchant Guild Delegation Gang, you do have a lot of powerful options, and when you throw in vehicles and the equipment and weapons that it can take, you could even make your gang even more powerful as the campaign goes on. So in my opinion, pick your favorite guild, get yourself your very vehicles, whatever flavor you want to, head out to the Ashways and start to tame them for the name of your merchant guild and the name of Pride and Profit. Now, of course, as always, just watch out for the saltiness of the Balance Bandwagon. They're going to have a huge field day with this, screaming out grieving and overpowered and game-breaking mechanics and all that kind of stuff. But just remember, when you defeat them and they start crying about it, to enjoy those tears and use it to warm your soul. So that's good to do for those of you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is valuable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good to do for this one, you guys. We will catch you guys on the next one. Peace out and stay classy.